already knows the answer. Nobody had a brilliant thought. That's what happened in Grantville, and my story, which I've been told by people who work at power plants and who do stepper motor design, Doug Jones being
You're not in
the
my way,
main one,
so you're fine.
that my story is not realistic
If I
because
wanna
these
catch
guys
something,
wouldn't
I pick
have
the
the
camera
blind
up,
spot
so.
that I put in the story. But I think he's wrong because I've talked to guys that work at power plants. But here's the answer.
Before we go on,
Yeah.
I want to confirm, Chuck and I were just talking, the Aqualator is 1634.5.
Right.
Yeah.
So for the Caribbean, I have gunnery computers.
Yes, you do.
Oh, you said they're on a ship and they ship.
Yeah, of course.
Except for you can put them in a float. So
Yes.
that's a gravity
And you can put them on gimbals.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and you can,
but- Good problem.
yeah, you're gonna have to have a good pressure regulator, but that's your problem.
Yeah, it is.
So
there.
So we have this story, which I strongly urge you to take a look at. It's my first published piece of fiction, which, as I told her, went through 15 major rewrites before David Carrico finally helped me tweak out some dialogue and got it actually up to publishable. And I will never, ever forgive him for forcing me to write fiction.
Speaking of that, how many of you would
Philip.
like to
Father
be
Philip,
a published writer?
Oh,
And you're not. Okay.
I'm a
Well,
published writer.
How did you become a published writer?
I sold my first published piece was at the Grantville Gazette on chocolate. I know a lot about chocolate.
Okay.
so
And I made $650.
Hey.
Woo-hoo-hoo!
One of the things that Eric did very early on was he got a contract to produce an anthology in the 1632 series, and it was going to be called Ring of Fire. And he came out to those of us who were working with him on the series and said, "Why don't you write something?" And people turned in stuff that was really bad and unpublishable. So he decided that
Sturgeon's law
Yeah.
applies. 95% of everything is crap.
Crap.
Well, yeah. So Eric decided
95 is
that
generous.
he would run a writing tutorial, and it's still running. It runs actually in 2 different places because when Eric was the editor of Jim Baen's Universe, he started the same thing. Eric has a real desire to have new writers get a chance to be published
Be successful.
and be successful. So if you want to, the way that the Grantville Gazette works is even if you are published a lot, like Virginia or the rest of us, you still have
Other
to.
pros, Brad, Signer,
Yeah.
everybody.
Posts in the 1632
Slush
conference your story, and it allows the group to do crit
Commentary.
commentary, and if it becomes publishable, then Paula buys it
At professional rates.
at professional rates.
Well, qualifying.
I understand those are real low because this is fact of life, but it's recognized by scientific.
5 cents a word qualifies you for SEPWA.
Well, how many of us are SIPWA members?
Because of
The Grantville Gazette.
Thing is that we're gonna talk about this Sunday.
Yeah, we're going to talk about more Sunday. So I'm going to go back to
I'm putting out a commercial.
Commercial.
If you want
So-
to stick around, and
Give me
we'll
lights.
teach you how.
Outside of this
Give me lights
on a year
for 1 second, and we're going to flip them twice. So, okay, so this is the answer to the question, how did Reginald Fessenden make the first AM radio broadcast?
He made it really
This
big.
is not his first draft, okay? This is the last remaining Alexanderson alternator in the world. It is operated by the government of Sweden. It is an international UN historical site. And it is operated on special occasions, like the anniversary of the
Radio.
of the first AM radio broadcast, Alexanderson Day they call it, and other special occasions. And so, but you can hear it if you tune to the right frequency when they broadcast. You can even hear it in the US. It's amazing. But it is an alternator. It is a mechanical AM transmitter. There is no electronics in here. What there is there's a big steel disc. Big steel disc. They put holes around the edge of the big steel disc. They put magnets lined up around the outside, right? With an electromagnet on one side and a coil on the other. When the hole lines up, the magnetism goes through. When the hole doesn't line up, the magnetism can't get through because the steel closes the circuit, right? I am massively oversimplifying.
Good, because it'd be beyond me if you didn't.
Right, absolutely. But do you see? Instead of having coils and wires and all sorts of fancy things spinning, what we have spinning is
Just the
They
steel.
spun the
a
core.
big, heavy steel disc. The coils just sit there. They don't do anything. Okay?
So there's
It's called
no-
a magnetic relaxation.
So there's no
alternator.
metal fatigue on the wires or the coils or the...
You don't, actually, you just embed them.
Right, because they don't move.
They don't move. But the point is, you can make radio transmissions then using nothing but a mechanical transmitter. Okay? Now that just gets you the basic carrier. It's silent at that point, right? You tuned in the AM station and there's nothing there.
You haven't broadcast yet.
I haven't broadcast. I haven't got any content yet. The very first thing that Fessenden did, his first broadcast, which was heard by 17 radio operators and logged by 17 different people who were sitting in ships and a shore operator who logged every transmission they heard. They were listening for Morse code, right, from other ships and stuff. And so we have the logs, they exist. And so that first transmission was heard by 17 of them, right? And they went, "What the hell is that?" Because of course,
Instead of did-da, did
instead of click, 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 they heard Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. This is Reginald Fessenden transmitting from Black Rock. Okay? And so they were going, "Ooh." So
17 fatal heart attacks.
but Fessenden did the simplest way to modulate the signal he could come up with. Y'all know what a carbon microphone is? Used to be in every telephone in the world. You take carbon grains between two pieces of metal, and when you squeeze them, the resistance goes down, and when they're not squeezed, the resistance goes up. So you talk at the piece of metal, and it vibrates, right? It squeezes the carbon grains, and your electrical resistance goes up and down. Well, Fessenden took 6 carbon microphones, arranged them in a circle, ran the signal through all 6 of them, and then stood up. And so he's got his AM radio power running through this wire out to his antenna. And he gets close enough to the wire to shout into the microphones without getting so close that he grounded himself.
Tell them how much power.
Huh?
Tell them how much power.
Oh, well, his initial transmitter was only 5,000 watts.
So you're putting your lips half an inch away from a 5,000 watt bare wire.
Right, right. Now think about that for a minute. Think about 100 watt.
And if you have a must,
Say it. Don't
Think about 100 watt. So, in the early days of mechanical radio, being a radio broadcast personality was exciting.
yeah, especially if you had a mustache, right?
Not knowing this happened because somebody would come in to clean up the carbon pile on the ground, not knowing what was going on.
There you go.
You make more carbon that way.
So exactly. So very quickly they came up with another way to modulate it. Okay, it turns out that you can modulate it using a transformer, and you can put a control signal into one side of a transformer and put the AM broadcast through another, and you can modulate it. It's crappy sound compared to what we have now, but it's utterly amazing sound compared to never having heard radio, okay?
Yeah. Did
Is it good
Merry
enough?
Christmas.
Well, the standard for good enough for this kind of crude technology is, can you recognize the musical instrument being played? And the answer is yes. Okay? So, the Voice of Luther goes on the air in 1635.
Yeah.
In 16, I think. That's about right. VOL goes on the air in about 1635, running a modified, downtime built Alexanderson alternator with a magnetic modulator.
The fact that
Into
it was
again, custom-built radio tower.
the fact that it was
in
invented by a Swede didn't hurt the
The fact
process.
that it was invented by a Swede didn't hurt anything, no. But so the story of the discovery of this technology and how it came into being in Grantville is in a story called Canst Thou Send Lightnings, in which a character, Father Nicholas Smithson, realizes that the reason they weren't able to build the alternator was they were trying to spin up alternators, and they didn't think of the idea of just letting it sit there and spinning the disc. And at the end of the story, we so desperately wanted to take the opposite of Galileo's last words. You know, Galileo's last words?
But it doesn't.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Galileo's last words were, but it moves. Okay? So what we wanted as the final phrase in the story was, but it doesn't move. It just sits there. So we couldn't do it. We couldn't make it work. And so we took that out, and David had the absolutely perfect phrase for the end. We said earlier, in paragraph earlier, that the idea, the perfect, that this was something that Grantvillers were never going to think of because their personality, their culture, the American way, was to just do something. They needed to think about it. They needed, because their personality, they were never going to think of just letting it sit there. It just wasn't part of their culture, right? And so Nick Smithson writes a book on interpreting uptime technology and uptime sources for downtime audiences. How to read the exegesis of uptime texts, right? Which he entitles How Not to Think Like a Redneck. And it becomes one of the best-selling books in Europe.
Rex, how big is that?
Huh?
How big is that?
How big is
That
it?
object?
Oh, that object.
So,
These are about 6 inches,
Which are?
the brass gauges.
Okay.
yeah,
Oh, it's
This
about-
is,
So you-
this is about 8 feet in diameter.
You
But
standing
remember,
next to it,
This was
yeah.
the last generation, okay? So this thing is, as I recall, and we can look them up, but this thing is it's either 150 or 175,000 watts,
yeah,
okay? You don't need this kind of power.
Mass?
huge.
Huge.
Heavy.
Steam engine mass.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you've got to have a steam engine to power it.
Yeah. The original models, do you have any notion of the
Yeah,
size mass?
yeah, 3 to 4 feet in diameter, and powered by an electric motor, powered by a steam generator, because you wanted the frequency to stay still, so you used a reed
Right.
to control the. Anyway, so 3 to 4 feet in diameter,
Ton and a
mass
half?
would be a ton and a half for the whole thing.
Yeah, you can put it on a
Maybe as
ship.
much as
When did
7
the
tons
Jesuits go on
of
the
extra
air?
stuff to make.
The Jesuits go on the air in Loyola of the North.
Roughly the same time.
Yeah, late 35, early 36.
Where is that
That's
station?
a Jesuit.
That's in Duet.
Within-
It's in Duet.
I'm
With
sorry,
the-
Virginia, where is that located again?
Support system.
Huh?
Münster.
Münster, that's right.
But less than 10.
So it's